Hi everyone, let's get started. I'm Victor, this is Will. We're both product engineers on the geocoding team. And today we're here to talk to you guys about everyone, about effective batch geocoding. So the expected audience for this presentation is someone that's familiar with geocoding, someone that has some working knowledge of either Python or JavaScript, and someone that's familiar with REST protocol. So if this isn't for you and you want to go do some other demo that you thought was also interesting, we totally understand. We're not offended. So Will and I will be covering the Geocode Addresses API, the new batch geocoding API, advantages to each approach, code samples, and demos demoing leveraging both the Geocode Addresses API and the batch geocode API. So first, let's discuss the Geocode Addresses API. Every time you publish a locator to your ArcGIS server, you will receive the Geocode Addresses API if you enable batch on that locator. So each request geocodes a max batch size records at a time. So for the ArcGIS Online World Geocoding service, max batch size is 1,000. So the Geocode Addresses API demands input and output of a JSON record set. So if you were to geocode against the online service, the way you would do it is you would send a JSON input record set of up to 1,000 records, and then retrieve back your results also in JSON. And of course, this requires credits when geocoding against the ArcGIS Online service, but is free if you're geocoding against your own locator on your own server. Calling geocode addresses. So let's look at a code sample of how one might go about calling geocode addresses programmatically through Python. So you'll see I have this function here called geocode batch. I want to draw your attention to the token part. So basically, if you're using a secure geocoding service, you need to pass a token. So only if your geocoding service is shared with everyone do you not need to pass a token. In all other cases, you do need to pass a token for authentication. You'll see in this specific example, along with passing the record set, which is a JSON of addresses, I'm also passing the category and the source country. Now these are specific to the ArcGIS Online geocoding service, but you probably would not send those if you're geocoding against a local geocoding service. Next, you'll see I'm doing some error handling for geocode addresses. So you'll see I'm doing urllib2.http error. So I'm expecting if there is an HTTP error, then retry the request. So let's say I set this timeout on the line above to 90 seconds, and I don't receive a response in 90 seconds, an HTTP error instead. So what I'll do is I'll retry the request. So I'll split that record set that I inputted, maybe 1,000 records. I'll split it into the first 500 and the second 500. And then I'll send those off each to geocode addresses and retrieve back the results so that the server is able to handle the new record sets that I'm passing. And then finally, since we know that geocode addresses returns back a JSON, I would load the JSON and be on my way. So some tips when debugging geocode addresses. So you expect records in the response, but if records gives you a key error in Python, then you have an error code. So you would expect a certain error code. And so these are some possible error codes that you might deal with when dealing with geocode addresses. So you'll see this API is actually pretty straightforward. It either returns back to you the records that you passed in with the XY coordinates, the spatially enabled addresses, or it'll give you back a specific error code and details for it. So either unsupported category, a stale token, a permissions issue, or some other error message. And it'll give you the actual message for that. So there are definitely advantages to using this API. So advantages to using the Geocode Addresses API is that it is fast for small tables, right? So if you have under 1,000 addresses, this is a great API to use. You just have to make one call and you have your results. It's easy to debug. It tells you exactly what's wrong when it comes back on the REST call. It's lightweight, so it's easy to set up, right? Anytime you publish any locator service to ArcGIS server, you do receive a Geocode Addresses REST endpoint that you can hit. And then finally, it's a synchronous operation, so it's a blocking call. So Basically, when you make the call, it returns back immediately. Either it failed or it's still working. So basically, in your code, you make the call and you wait for it to come back. There's no option for you to go do something else in the code. It's a synchronous blocking call. Now there's a new API in 10.5 called the Batch Geocode API. So this is another way to perform batch geocoding. The Batch Geocode API is another REST endpoint for batch geocoding. It's a one-stop shop for geocoding large tables. So this API was built to be robust and built for large tables. And instead of inputting JSON and outputting JSON, it accepts multiple file formats as both input and output. So it accepts CSV tables, Excel tables, or hosted tables from your portal. So one thing to note with this API is that it is portal in, portal out. So it takes the file from your portal that you want to geocode, and it returns back the file or layer to your portal. And of course, returning back the file would just mean returning back the original file with additional columns appended, so like the XY columns appended. And it returns back out either CSV, XLS, or feature layer. So this API actually leverages multi-threading for optimized performance internally. So the way it works is you have a geoprocessing service that wraps your geocoding service. And you tell that geoprocessing service, hey, I have this item on my portal, this CSV or XLS item that has addresses. So you point it to the item you want to geocode and the locator service on your portal. And so the locator service you point it to can either be a local locator on your portal, or it can be the ArcGIS Online World Geocoding Service. But of course, that one costs credits. So you can imagine why this is an API that's really great for organizations that have an on-premises large geocoder deployment. So this API is a way that you can effectively leverage that large locator and perform batch geocoding against it. So the batch geocode REST endpoint available in 10.5, you'll find it in the ArcGIS Server Manager, as well as in your REST Services directory under Services, Utilities, Geocoding Tools. And under Geocoding Tools, you'll find two new tools, Analyze Geocode Input and Batch Geocode. And you'll find it, of course, in your portal, because it is specifically a portal tool. Configuring the geoprocessing service. So you could imagine against different locators that you point it to, you would want it to have a different factor of concurrency. So let's say you have a local on-premises locator that has multiple cores and has multiple instances spread across multiple cores. So you would want to leverage the number of threads you're using to complete the job. So you would set a higher thread count. So in the sharing API, under your portal utility services, once you set a geocoder as a utility service in your portal, they show up in the portal sharing API. So in this portal sharing API, you can configure the threads by adding a new property, the num batch threads. And so the reason we're configuring threads on certain geocoding services is because this geocoding tools, the new API, batch geocode, takes your large table, chunks it up internally, and sends maybe 4 threads to the geocoding service. So it sends 4 concurrent geocode addresses requests at a time. And when one thread comes back, it says, oh, this thread is free. It sends off another geocode addresses request. So basically what it does is the new API is multi-threaded for your convenience and leverages your on-premises geocoders to get the most out of them and get the jobs done as fast as possible. Now, setting the num batch threads is the responsibility of the admin because they understand the resources based on their servers specifically. So you can learn more about this at Configure Portal to Geocode Addresses. Now, calling batch geocode programmatically in code, because it is a geoprocessing service on your server, you can call arcpy.import toolbox, and then it gives you a built-in arcpy call. So you'll see I have all these parameters set up. So the first one I want to draw your attention to is geocode parameters. So there's actually 2 new parameters in the new API, Analyze Geocode Input and Batch Geocode. So normally when you call geocode addresses, you have to submit a field mapping. but that field mapping isn't always necessarily obvious because your data columns might not be configured correctly and they might not line up always perfectly. So there's this new API called Analyze Geocode Input. And what that does is it takes the file and it takes the locator service and tries to suggest to you a field mapping. So it creates a suggested field mapping. And once you pass it to Analyze Geocode Input, you get back this field mapping and pass that field mapping as well as some other parameters to batch geocode. So you'll see I have all these parameters. And then I make the call, finally, result equals arcpy.batchGeocode of geocoding tools, the geoprocessing service. And now batch geocode is asynchronous. So the way it works is you submit the job, and what it returns back to you is a job ID. And it is the responsibility of the client to check that job ID periodically and ask the server, hey, server, is my job done? Is my job done? And the server will pulse back, I'm still executing, or give back like percentage completion. So all of the actual geocoding is happening on the server, and it's the client's responsibility to ask the server, hey, is my job done yet? So that's the asynchronous nature of the new API. Advantages to the new API, batch geocode. So obviously there's more input and output formats. So CSV, XLS, hosted tables, and feature layers, as opposed to the Geocode Addresses API, which is just JSON in, JSON out, right? There's built-in error handling. So all that sort of error handling I was showing you, the incorrect category, or you don't have permissions to access this resource, all that error handling is built in. So there's less for the client to do. The client really just needs to make the REST call and then wait for a response. And the batch geocode will propagate that error that it received from geocode addresses back up to you. And with the built-in error handling, it is more robust. So the client-side logic of you having a large table and chunking it up into packets of 1,000 in JSON and sending that off to geocode addresses, all of that actually happens internally for batch geocode. So there's no client-side logic. You just need to pass the item that you want geocoded, and it'll get it done for you and put the result in your portal. As opposed to if you were trying to geocode a large table with geocode addresses, you would have to turn that large table into chunks of 1,000 addresses in JSON and then send each of those to geocode addresses. So batch geocode sort of does all of that for you. It's robust. It's meant to handle large inputs. And finally, it's asynchronous. So like I said earlier, the asynchronous capability of the API means that you can make the call and the client just asks every once in a while the server, hey, is my job done yet? So without further ado, I'm not sure what that was. I'll demo a pro script that I wrote that leverages this batch geocoding API. So oh, that's what that was. This is struggling. All right, that's fine. I brought a backup just in case the demo didn't work. So I actually have a video of the demo for you guys somewhere. Cool. So we can do this demo first. So this is another way that leverages the same batch geocoding API. So in your portal, your on-premises portal, this is a new tool that we hope to release in the next ArcGIS deployment. So under analysis, you can find this new tool called Geocode Locations from table. So this is in an on-premises portal, keep in mind. So on your on-premises portal, you have your locator from your portal, and you choose an input table from your portal. So you'll see this guy has 4K USA addresses. And so this is where it's calling that Analyze Geocode Input API that I was talking about. And it's returning back to you a suggested field mapping. It's analyzing your file and the locator. And let's say I want an output as a feature layer. And I give the output a result name. Let's say just call it geocoded results. And I'm going to click run analysis. But first, because I'm a developer, I'm going to debug the network calls that are happening. So after I click run analysis, you'll see specifically the submit job call over here. So that call actually submits the job and gets back a job ID. And we're going to check this job ID every couple of seconds to see how the job is doing. And once we periodically, as we check the job, it'll tell us, yes, it's done, or no, we're still executing. So because this is a big batch job, we actually prepared some programming jokes while this is running. I have them on my phone. Cool. So they only get worse from here, so you gotta bear with me. So how many programmers does it take to screw in a light bulb? None. That's a hardware problem. I got one chuckle. That's good. I got one more. This one's pretty bad. So a programmer puts 2 glasses on his bedside table before going to sleep, a full one in case he's hungry, and an empty one in case he's not. It's like a conditional catching. I could do this all day. Luckily, the demo doesn't take all day. So, all right, so we're waiting for the job. Job should complete pretty soon. Cool. And we have the job populate on the map. And you'll see the job actually, the geocoded results actually shows up in your portal. So keep in mind the new API is portal in, portal out. So you'll need an on-premises deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise to be able to use the new batch Geocode API. Okay. Let's see if this wants to cooperate now. Okay, cool. This is promising. I have one more demo prepared for you guys. So this is a custom script that I wrote in ArcGIS Pro that leverages the batch Geocode API. So this is a custom script called batch Geocode. And I'm going to double click. And we have certain parameters that the script takes. So the locator service, so I'm going to call it, use the North America locator. So these were the locators available in my portal. Input files available in my portal, so let's say the same 4K addresses. Excuse me. So the output type, let's say I want a feature layer. I could make a CSV, but that's not as appealing for a demo, right? Because then I would just have to open a CSV. But if I write a feature layer, then it'll populate on the map all nice and pretty. So let's call the name of the output feature layer demo out, geocoding options. Since I selected the North America locator, the only source countries that are available are USA, Canada, and Mexico. It is USA. And category is nothing. So let's click run, see what happens. So you'll see here immediately it gives me back, I submitted the job and here's the job ID. And so this tool on the client side, all it really did was take the parameters and pass them to the server. And it got back this job ID. And it's going to query this job ID periodically and ask the server, hey, are you done yet? And the server is pulsing back these messages, which I'm relaying to the client, 0% complete, 20% complete. So while this is going, I have more programming jokes. This one's interactive. You ready for this one?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Is your mic on?
Test. Can you guys hear me?
Cool.
Okay.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Broken state machine.
Broken state machine who?
Knock, knock. Then you keep going. So this one actually isn't a video, so there's no way I can fast forward for you. This is happening live. Do you have a question? Yeah.
I do.
Sure.
With the you want to change it, is there the ability to do that? Is there an endpoint to redefine?
Absolutely.
Or CSV?
Yeah, so the way it works is you don't see it specifically in this tool, but on the map viewer tool where I first showed you, it gives you out the field mappings. And on that field mapping, you can like select and change which ones. So that's a great question. So they are two completely separate APIs. So first, as a client, you would make the call to analyze geocode input and then give the user, hey, this is the field mapping that we found out. But obviously, you want to present that to the user so that they don't submit a bunch of poorly mapped fields, right?
Is the batch geocode available or the code, or it's a custom you made it?
So this specific script, I can put it online, yeah.
And it can use the local geolocator.
Yeah, exactly. So the batch geocoding API it's portal only. So if you have a portal set up on premises, then you can use the batch geocoding API. And the API can hit either a local locator or the ArcGIS Online World Locator. But if you're using the World Locator, it obviously charges credits.
So you can't use it for ArcGIS, like not the portal?
You have to have portal. It's a portal tool. So it reads in from portal and writes out to portal. So it looks like the script completed. So let's go to our portal and inspect the results. So I think I called it demo out, right? Okay, cool. There it is. It was created at 5:51, 1 minute ago. And we can drag and drop that onto the map, and there it is. Cool. Now I think will take it over, talking to you more about the APIs and giving some custom JavaScript demos that he did.
Yeah. Okay, so Victor has mentioned the advantages of using both the Geocode address, which is the synchronous version, our API for batch geocoding, as well as batch geocode, which is the asynchronous geoprocessing tool used to batch geocoding with asynchronously. And he also gave you examples of Python and how to use it on our client apps. Now I'm going to show you how to utilize these two methods or these two APIs in a JavaScript app. So the first example I'm going to show is just a simple demo. And what I'm doing is I'm taking a CSV. Let's close these down. A CSV of 2,000 random addresses. I'm going to geocode these addresses and plot them onto the map. So choose a file. Here's the random addresses. And sure enough, here are the addresses all within the Los Angeles area. So this is how I'm going to show you, or this is how you do it in the code. So as you can see, this is the batch, this is my batch geocoding function. What I'm doing here is I'm essentially uploading the CSV file, and I'm breaking it down into address by address. But because our batch size is 1,000, I can't give a request that has more than 1,000 addresses, so I have to break it down. And the way I'm breaking it down is by requests of 1,000 addresses each. Since I have 2,000 addresses in the CSV, I'm sending 2 requests. Here, I'm also providing a field mapping based off of my knowledge of the CSV file. So I have to break down these files, or break down these columns based off of what I know. So I know that the first column is the object ID, followed by the address. I have a city column, and I have a region and postal column. And so based off of my knowledge, I'm setting the field mappings for the batch geocoding call. So then I run the geocoding call via post request. And then I return, once the geocoding call is complete, I get a response back, and then I return that response onto the map by calling this plot points function. And so that's how you would go about batch geocoding synchronously with the Geocode Addresses API. The next thing I'm going to show you is how to do it asynchronously. Now, like Victor said, this is a portal in, portal out solution. So in order for me to batch geocode with JavaScript API, I have to get the CSV on my portal. So here I have a portal set up. And I have a file of random addresses. This is a bigger file, 27,000 random addresses. So I'm going to click on this file here. And let's download it just to see the contents of this file. Again, it's random addresses within the Los Angeles area. Yeah. So in order for me to use this file, I'm going to take the item ID in the URL. I'm going to start my batch geocoding demo, and it's going to ask me for my item ID. I'll add the item ID here. And what's happening is it's going through the geocode, analyze geocode inputs, and now it's asking me for the new file that I'm going to save my results onto. So I'm going to name this batch geocoding results. And hit OK. And as you can see, I am getting a constant update of my batch job based off of the code that I've created. And based off of the statuses that I'm checking for the batch geocoding job I sent out. So since this is 27,000 addresses, it's going to take a while. Victor, do you have any?
I have more jokes.
Yeah, you have more jokes?
I have more jokes.
Okay.
Oh, I like this one. There are 10 kinds of people in the world, those who understand binary and those who don't. Hey, that one was good. I laughed with that one. I think I have one more.
One more? Okay.
Oh yeah, we're almost out of time too. So, hey, want to hear a joke? Parsing HTML with a regex. That sounds terrible. Never try to do that.
I actually enjoyed that. Okay, so it's now complete, and so now what we're going to see is that the result file is going to be placed on my portal. So I'm going back to the portal. I go back to my content. And sure enough, here is my result CSV. So I'll download this file. All right. Some more waiting. And you can see the inputs that I created paired up with the outputs or the result or response from the batch geocoding job. So how do you do this in code, in the JavaScript code? So the first thing I want to show you, give me a second, is my analyze geocode inputs. Now, the first thing I want to show you is the gathering of the parameters. If you want more information on the parameters that are needed for the Analyze Geocode Input API, I provided a link, I believe it's here, that will give you more information about both the analyzed geocode inputs as well as the batch geocode API. Okay, so I've gathered the inputs, and now I'm going to send a request via post. And what I get back from the request isn't the results from that job, it's actually a job ID that I'm going to use in this object called Geoprocessor, which essentially submits another job that checks the status of my analyzed geocode input job. And so the way I do that is I use the geocode processor object. I submit a job, another job, and this submit job method has 4 parameters. The first one is any objects that I want to submit with the job. And since I don't need any objects for this polling request, I simply put null. The second job is the function that is called once the job is complete. So once a job is complete, here's a function that's going to be called. The third job is anytime the job status changes. So upon changing of the job status, there is another call, which is a third call or a third function that I'm going to use, followed by the failure state. Anytime that the job fails, this is the function that's going to be used. So in here, I have another method. In the job completion function, I have another method here, get field mapping. And so once this job of analyzing geocode inputs is complete, then I run another job, or run another request to retrieve the information, retrieve the results from that job. And so here's the request here. I'm simply retrieving the response, which in our case, for the analyzed geocode inputs, is the field mapping, the suggested field mapping that I want to actually do the batch geocoding in the next request. So in this response here, I have another function that says batch request async, which is the function that starts the batch geocoding. And the parameter that I have in there is response.value, which gives you the values of the field mapping that I'm going to pass into the response request. So here's the batch geocoding API in action. Again, I'm gathering the parameters based off of inputs from the user and the field mapping that I got from the analyzed geocode method. So I get all of these parameters here. I run the request. Again, because this is asynchronous, I'm not getting the response, or I'm not getting the values or the answer to this request. What I am getting is a job ID to check that request periodically. And so I get this, in this response, I pass in the job ID here. Can you see that arrow? Yeah. I pass in this job ID here, and then in this geoprocessing object, I submit another request that pulls the batch geocoding request to get the status update and to know when the job has been complete. So here's the success function, here's the status change function, and here's the failure function. In the status change function, what I do is I'm parsing the message that I get from the status change, and I'm just submitting it to the progress bar function that I have to update the progress bar that you saw in the demo. And then once it's complete, I update the progress bar to 100%. And then I don't get the answers, or I don't get the response or the information because it's being put onto the portal. It's not actually being given back to me in JSON. The answers to the geocode coding response or requests are not given to me via JSON. They're actually put back onto the portal as another item. And so then what I do is I get that job ID, I send it to a retrieve function, and this retrieve function will give me the item ID of the new file, of the file that has all of the responses to each address request. So that's it. That's how you would go about in JavaScript geocoding, or both batch geocoding with an asynchronous Geocode Addresses API and batch geocoding using the batch geocode Geoprocessing API that's in 10.5. So we've gone through the advantages of each approach. We also gave you a couple of samples in Python and JavaScript, as well as applications that you can use both services or both APIs in the map viewer and Pro. So at this time, we've completed our session. Is there any questions about the batch geocoding or anything around that? Question?
As far as the portal goes, does it have to be my organization's internal portal, or will it work with ArcGIS Online?
It's a good question. So do you mean the map viewer demo that I showed, or just programming against the API?
Geocode API.
So the API is available in 10.5 for on-premises organizations. It's not yet online.
Okay.
We hope to add that in future releases. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. We'll stick around for a little while if you guys want to come ask us questions individually. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.